Well, thank you very much, Michael, for joining me on the Presencing the Depth podcast. I appreciate you giving us your time and coming on.
Very happy to be here.
Yeah. I first came across you on Facebook actually through a Facebook group and read some things that you'd posted in some groups and then started following your page personally, and yeah, I've really enjoyed a lot of the content you've been putting up and watching some of your videos and things. So yeah, just wanted to say that up front actually, is that I've really enjoyed following you in the time that I have.
Yeah, so this is very good. The whole idea of Facebook came from my sons many, many, many years ago. And we were living in a forest at the time, so quite removed from society. So it was a way to, not really to contact, because I'm not looking for so much coming back to me, but just a way to put Dhamma into the world, which was the instruction of my teacher to, this is what you have to do now. So
Yeah.
Facebook has developed a lot in those years, but that was the original intention.
Yeah.
To put Dhamma into the world.
Yeah, beautiful. And how long ago was that your teacher gave you that instruction to put Dharma into the world?
So that is a long, long time ago. It was the end of a retreat. So I would be in my early 30s, I think. So now I'm in my 70s. So, it was 40 years ago. And the story is quite well known, but I went to his room at the end of another retreat. This was before I was living with him. And I asked my usual end of retreat question, which is, well, what more can I do? What's the next thing I can do to improve my practice? And he looked at me and said, Michael, now you must teach. And this was a shock for me because I never had any idea of being a teacher. I liked to be with him. I liked to sit in the Dhamma hall and listen to him. I had no ambition at all. So it was a shock, and I always, turned around to see who he was really speaking to. And then I said, but I don't want to do it. This is not something in my mind. I don't want to do this. And then he said these words, which really demonstrated his relationship to Dhamma and the world, and has become an integral part of how I understand and present Dhamma, which is, I said, I don't want to do this. And he said, but I don't ask you for you. I ask you for the people on the island where you live. I was living on the Isle of Man then. So they too can receive Dhamma. So in other words, it's not about you. It's not about you becoming some kind of celebrity. It's about you sharing what you have benefited from. And so there's lots of stories around this and how I tried to fail in getting disciples, but it didn't really work. And I became, slowly, I think I became fairly popular. But the integrity is always there. It's most certainly not about me. It is about sharing Dhamma.
Yes, yes, beautiful. Okay. And that was in your early 30s. So to me, that strikes me as quite a young age to be asked to teach. Was it the same for you?
I have no idea. I only know that my whole life has, only now when I look back, of course, but my whole life has been around Dhamma. Even my childhood, there was an interesting, of course, when I was a child, we only had Christianity. So it was Jesus.
Yes.
And then when the 60s came around and people were going to India and coming back, and the idea of other systems of religion were becoming known, such as Buddhism, for example, there was an immediate attraction to that. The attraction of harmlessness, the attraction of kindness, of taking care of not only other people, but animals and the planet. And then the Beatles made popular Transcendental Meditation, and I was immediately attracted to that without really knowing anything about it. So my whole life, again, without any ambition, just led me to this moment where I met my teacher, first of all, and he said, just a few words that changed my life. And then to feel so privileged to spend time with him, to sit on retreats. And then
at what age was that, Michael?
Well, when I first began my meditation life, I was 18.
18, right.
So that, again, that's quite young. I don't really meet many teenagers who are interested in Dhamma. And then even have the discipline to do it. It's a very disciplined lifestyle. to sit for long hours in meditation, and yet not to want something out of that meditation, but just to surrender into the stillness and then see what that brings. So yes, it was quite young, but it didn't feel young. It seemed to be of the time. We were all hippie style with long hair and love beads and patchouli oil, and everything was about love and peace, man. And that's really what transcendental meditation represented to my generation, I think. And then I found that was not really demanding enough for me. It's a very gentle process. And so I was able then to practice Zen, which is the opposite of being shouted at and hit with sticks, and the idea of meditating on the waterfall. All this was very attractive for me because I was young and I didn't have to go into the army, so I had all this energy. And then I had 7 years of practicing alone because I went back to live on the Isle of Man, where I'm from. And then, all stories are long and complicated, but eventually in my kind of late-ish 20s, I went to a monastery in England where I met this man who, he just, on this first evening, he said these words, which really almost physically changed my life. And he said, if you want to be happy in your life, you have to cultivate a loving heart. And that idea of love was the part that had been missing. I hadn't grasped that. It didn't seem very apparent in Zen. And in transcendental meditation, it was more general, as I said, love and peace, man, without really knowing what that meant. And so that became my Dhamma, this way of loving kindness. And is still now, on our retreats, it's a big part of what I present, the idea of loving and being accepting of the moment of reality without comment, and then to respond in a wise and loving way. Something like that. So I don't know if I was young, and I don't know if this was not usual. It's just how things worked for me.
Yes, I understand.
Without seeking anything. It's like, when people, when they become celebrities and they have money, and they're in interviews, they say, well, I was very poor when I was a child, but we didn't know we were poor. That was just, well, it's something similar. I don't know if it was fast or slow. I have no concept of time passing.
Yeah. And so what, as an 18-year-old, drew you to transcendental meditation as a practice?
Okay, if I answer really honestly, I can say it was my karmic disposition. It was something inside me that was waiting for that moment to appear in my life. And the moment I heard about this meditation, and it's hard to imagine now, but that's such a long time ago, and that was kind of a new word in our vocabulary, even meditation, although it existed, but we hadn't, as ordinary people, we hadn't really been aware of it. And there was just this natural attraction to the idea of meditation, even if I didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
So it was something bigger than me inside me. It was a karmic disposition. And I was able to follow it. And, the stories that led me to that, if you ever read my autobiography, it seems quite fantastic. And you might think, well, that doesn't seem to be true. That doesn't seem to be real. But it is real. It's those doors that opened for me without any intention on my part. So, yeah, it was a karmic disposition.
Yeah. And then I'm imagining that in that time period between when you're 18 and you start practicing transcendental meditation, and then you move on to Zen and, meet your teacher for the first time, and then eventually in your early 30s, your teacher asks you to go and teach. At some point during that period, I imagine that there was a thirst for truth that arose in you. Would that be correct?
Yes. Oh, yes,
Yeah.
most certainly. It wasn't, I never thought of meditation as being an escape from life or just a relaxation process. which is why, although I have no criticism of transcendental meditation at all, it was the door opening, but it wasn't enough for me.
Yeah.
And so then I went to Zen, I say, which is the opposite of that. The discipline is much greater. And so it was about, and then of course I was reading about Buddhism, and I had, when I was training alone, I had 3 books by a man called Tamalawa Sadatissa. And I just rotated those 3 books for 7 years as I sat alone, wanting more and more to understand, to go deeper and deeper in my understanding.
Mm.
And then later I met Tamalawa Sadatissa, and it was, again, a great privilege. He was my first Buddhist teacher. He was a monk, so he was my first Buddhist teacher.
Mm.
But yes, it was that. So why is it like this? What, the same questions that took the Buddha out of the comfortable life in the palace. So why do I have all this, and other people have misfortune and ill health and short life and difficulties, but I have all this? And it was those similar. I think for everyone, it's the same kind of question. Why is it the way it is? And then I think slowly and gently the understanding began to arise, with more and more insights into the reality of life.
Did your teacher, when he asked you to teach, did he tell you why he'd... So I hear you say that it wasn't about you, it was about the people on the Isle of Man, and you could bring the Dharma to them through your teaching. But I'm interested in, did your teacher recognize something in you in particular to be able to say, well, now you are ready to teach? Did he talk to you about that at all?
Well, I would never, in all the years I knew my teacher, so 22 years when we were together, it never occurred to me that I had a special place in his life. It just never occurred to me. And that really is part of my social and cultural background, that, as a British person, well, we're not allowed to have ideas like that. But then later, when I began to reflect, it did seem apparent that I had a special place with him. Just for small things, like the way he would take care of me, and the way he lived in England, of course, and he drove a car in England. He was a monk, of course, Saido Rewete Dhamma. But he would, at the end of retreats, he would take me to the station. Well, I thought he did that for everyone. But no, it was only me. And I didn't realize this until years and years later. And then he would tell me certain things that I would really dismiss as being, well, obviously you can't mean me. But he did. And so I would, with my time with him, he was just someone that I was really, that my admiration for him was enormous. That he saw something in me, I never would even have that thought in my mind. But in reality, many years later, I began to look back and think, yeah, he didn't do that with other people. He only did it with me. And I didn't realize it at the time. So I think, it's very difficult to say these words, but yeah, I think he saw the ability. And many, many years later, I was invited to be the guest of honor at the Buddha Day celebration in his monastery. And he invited me to be there, to be the guest of honor, and to give the principal Dhamma talk. Well, such a request from my teacher. Yes, I will do it. I don't want to do it, but you asked me. But my first thought was, when he asked me, obviously they can't find anyone else. That was my first thought. And then later, at the end of the talk, he came to me, and I have the photograph of us together in this moment, and he said, "Oh, so Michael, that was a very, very good Dhamma talk." Well, really, that's all the praise I ever needed, just that confirmation that I was sharing the Dhamma to 60 people in this case. So it's such an idea that he held me in a special place. Obviously never occurred to me.
Yeah. And I'm interested in what enlightenment means in general, but then specifically what it might mean to you. Do you have a definition of enlightenment that you use?
Well, I don't really speak about it. The Zen people say enlightenment is like a poison in the mouth, spit it out. And I think that's a good practice, not to get lost in some future idea of something that you can't know until it happens.
Mm.
But the understanding of awakening, and awakening is well, it's a Buddhist word rather than enlightenment. Enlightenment is more from a Christian perspective. So awakening is also a good word to use, because when we're asleep and we're dreaming, that dream is real for us. If you're being chased down the road by someone with a knife in the dream, that's real, and you meet the fear and the panic, etc. It's only when you wake up that you can say, oh, thank heavens, that was just a dream. So awakening in Dhamma terms is the same thing, is the awakening into reality, into the understanding of what delusion really is, and how we make our life around delusion, beginning with and established in the delusion of a permanent self-identity.
Yes.
But then when it comes to awakening itself, it is the ending of all fear and desire, because all fear and desire belongs to self. So when there's no self, there is no place for fear and desire to take a hold. And I think in a way that's how you can test the authenticity of certain teachers. If they're still following their desires, then they're not fully awakened. They may have insights, of course, but they're not fully awakened.
Yes.
I think that's now the idea of being awakened is very popular. But if you want to know, am I fully awakened? And the question to ask yourself is, do I still have desire and fear? And if the answer is no, you're not, and that's okay. You know, there's just further to go. There's more letting go to happen.
Yeah, sure. No, that's very clear to me, and I certainly still have fear in my life, and I certainly still follow desires. So it's not a question of whether I've reached awakening or not. That's very clear to me. But so in your life then, can I ask you personally, do you still have fear and do you still follow desires?
So traditionally, the way to ask the question you're asking is to ask, do you still have suffering? Look at that part of your life. Do you still have suffering? And my answer is no. No. It's not that I don't have it. It no longer is present in this life.
Yes.
When self falls away, then all attachments to it fall away. So it becomes very difficult. It has to be more like the story of Bodhidharma, who was in front of the emperor of China. And it says the emperor of China, who's just been insulted or felt he was insulted, that's self. He says to Bodhidharma, so who are you? He said, I don't know. When I look for something, I don't find anything. So that's the reality. Self is finished. But conventionally, you can say, well, my name is Daruma and I come from the south of India. So I have this, you don't forget your story. You don't forget your brothers and sisters and your parents and your family life. You don't forget those things. But now they're just sort of unemotional. Your story now is an unemotional memory. There's no emotion attached to it.
Right.
Because self, the attachment to a self-identity is finished.
Yes. And then for you, was there a moment when that attachment to the self-identity dissolved completely and was no longer there for you? Like, can you pinpoint a moment in time when that happened?
Yes. Yes, very clearly. I don't know. This is such a good subject to speak about.
Why is that? What is your hesitance about? I'm interested.
I think because of the potential misunderstanding of what I speak.
I see.
I have no idea to present myself as anything really.
Yeah.
I suppose again, to go right back to my teacher, this is not about you becoming famous. It's not about you becoming a Dhamma superstar. It's about sharing Dhamma.
Yeah.
So my awakening is not, I think, is not something interesting. I don't know how that can help other people. You know.
Well, so let me then tell you why I ask. So with my experience with other spiritual teachers, and the teachers that I'm thinking of aren't in the traditional Buddhist modality. It's much more Advaita Vedanta or yeah, like Hinduism, Taoism, other forms of spirituality with some Buddhist understanding, you know, there, but it's certainly not, let's say, a Theravadan path or a Mahayanan path or anything like that. And these teachers will you know, talk about their life story in a way where it's an example to their students and can serve as inspiration. So the difficulties that they faced during their journey as a seeker and how they may have overcome those obstacles and you know, what they had to let go of, what they had to surrender, these sorts of things. Yeah, to serve as an inspiration for their students. And the teacher that I spent the most time with in his ashram, in his community, could tell me a very specific point in time which awakening occurred for him. And he would use the word enlightenment as well, right? It's sort of interchangeable.
Well, I am reluctant to speak in that way. I think it's not part of a Dharma tradition to speak
Yes.
about it. But to answer your question broadly, yes, I can pinpoint the exact moment. I know exactly where I was, and I know exactly what was happening, and I know anyway, it was in India. Not that that is a reference point, but I was in India, and there was a precise moment where everything fell away, everything.
Yes.
And there was this dwelling in this absolute emptiness for what seemed like hours and hours and hours. Actually, it was just minutes. But it was what in Buddhism you would call akaliko. So it's outside time. Time no longer existed.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
yeah, I can quite easily locate that moment. I have not forgotten it. And interesting that I don't want to speak about it, but I wrote about it in my autobiography, so you could read about it and say, you know, that's what happened. And that was the 1 minute that preceded it, and this was the next part of my life that followed. And then what I had to do about it, that everything was different, but everything was the same. Life went on. There was just this way of an emptiness of any idea of a self. In Advaita Vedanta, of course, they speak about the self, whereas in Buddhism, we speak about the absence of self. It means the same. But yes, that's what happened. And of course, here's the big thing, of course, I didn't do it. I had spent, well, I was 50s when it happened. So I'd spent from 18 to early 50s doing this practice without any ambition, without any desire to become someone or something. And then in a moment, triggered by the moment that went before it, or conditioned by the moment, it happened. In Varanasi.
So it's interesting there that you say you'd been practicing for, you know, several decades with no, you know, desire to get anywhere. And I notice for me, you know, in my experience, when I'm, say, meditating or when I'm inquiring in some way, there is generally some motivation that drives me to some degree of a desire to become more conscious, or to become more open, or, you know, to become more loving, to become freer. So there are these motivations that create an idea of a later moment. You know, even though I know that, you know, there is no future that I can cling to and that is concrete. There is only this present moment, but yet in my practice there are these future orientated thoughts that come up. So I'm interested then, for you, as you're practicing, and as you say, there was no idea of some place to get to, what was it that kept you practicing?
Well, I go right back to what I said earlier, this karmic disposition, in a way that there was a deep-seated feeling that I was born to do this. This is the reason for this. This is quite romantic what you speak now, but this is the reason for this life, this rebirth is to follow this. And whatever lives had preceded this, they brought me to this one where everything really just fell into place. So I didn't have any ambition to get somewhere except to be the best disciple of my teacher that I could be. So I was always looking, well, what more can I do in my practice? And he would give me, you know, when you wake up in the morning, before you get out of bed, put your attention on your breath. All right, just 2 or 3 breaths. Then when you sit on the bed and your feet touch the floor, put your attention there. Then when you go to the bathroom to clean your teeth, put your attention there. So I didn't have ambition to be someone or to be no one, but just to do the practice to the best of my ability, to sit as well as I could. So when I started sitting, you know, I had many cushions because I experienced pain like everyone else. And then I began to realize, well, what I really want is to be self-reliant. So I want to be able not to rely on Buddha statues and shrines that we have here and cushions to sit on, but I want to be able to sit flat. So wherever I am, I can sit. So these things, you know, propelled me in my practice, but not with the idea of becoming something or even understanding something. The understanding seemed to be quite. When Maharishi Mahesh Yogi was asked about enlightenment, his answer was really superb. So Maharishi Mahesh Yogi was the founder of Transcendental.
Yes.
I don't know if he was the founder of it, but he was the one that made it popular. He was asked, well, what is enlightenment? And he said, oh, it's obvious. And that's what awakening is. It's the recognition of the obvious. And all the insights we have, or, you know, people talk about these powerful insights where I understood the obvious. You know, it is, of course, we're all the same. Of course, we all want the same thing in life. Of course, we all want to be happy. Of course, none of us want to be unhappy. Of course, animals are not different from us. And it's that nature of the of courseness. And so for the practical part of my practice, I wanted to improve all the time. But the idea of something more than that did not really occur to me.
Right.
My teacher was the inspiration. I never thought I could be like him. And then it just over time, without realizing it, you know, began to manifest that my life became more loving, quite spontaneously, as the fears and desires began to diminish.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, your life became more loving quite spontaneously, because when you spoke about your teacher saying those words to you, Michael, in order to be happy, you have to cultivate a loving heart. Where I go with that is, okay, then how do you do that? How do you cultivate a loving heart? So maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
Well, that was it. First of all, there was that recognition. That is it. Okay, I have it now. So how do I do it? And that's when I spent the next, you know, kind of 22 years with him, working. And whenever I would go to his room with any kind of difficulty or problem with my work or my family or whatever, I would obviously kneel in front of him and say, oh, but it's like this. And he would listen and he'd say, Michael, so now you need loving kindness. The response and the solution to any difficulty is love. And if love isn't the answer, you know, you're not asking the right question. And so then I would say, okay, so how do I do it? And he would give me some example or some illustration of what I can do to make this situation more acceptable, more loving for me, where I can be the one taking responsibility rather than being the victim in it.
Right.
There are many examples. You know, there was a time, well, just many ordinary life examples. And I had a very close relationship with my father, and we were good friends until his death. But of course, he was my father, so he didn't agree with everything I wanted to do, especially, you know, around the idea of meditation and Buddhism. He didn't know what that was. And so one time we were having this difficult moment, and I went to my teacher, and because I loved this man so much, my father, and I didn't want to be in this difficult situation with him. And I said something to my teacher about my father. I'm having difficulty with my father. And my teacher just kind of relaxed in his chair and he said, ah, yes. Now the Buddha had trouble with his father too. And that was such a relief. Of course, everyone who is unawakened has difficulty in relationships. Of course, because all our relationships are about ourselves. My relationship with the world is about me and my desires and my fears. My father's relationship with the world is about him and his desires and his fears. Now, how can we harmonize that? And then you would say, well, your father is just an ordinary man. He's just a guy who works and who does the best he can for his family. He's not on the Dhamma path, but you are. Therefore, the responsibility for the quality of that relationship lies with you. You're the one on the Dhamma path. And so that's a great relief. Okay, now I have to change something in me to repair this relationship, and it repaired very quickly after I vowed never ever to speak of Buddhism with him again.
Right.
He felt threatened by it. I didn't realize that. He felt threatened. And that the moment that changed our relationship, and very quickly after that, he would begin to ask me questions about Buddhism.
Oh, wow.
Said, well, really, it's just about being kind and generous and caring and blah, blah, blah. And he looked at me and he said, but that's what I told you when you were a little boy. I said, yes, exactly that. So, loving kindness became, I think, well, even now, when I teach retreats, there are the Vipassana practices, Anapanasati, and Vipassana Bhavana, and then Metta Bhavana. And those three things become the whole practice. Loving kindness is introduced very early in retreat, like third or fourth day or something like that. And it's an integral part of what's presented. It's not an extra that's tagged on at the end. It's something important. And I think probably the longest talk I gave on retreat is the introduction to the loving kindness practice. Because it needs, the first person we have to have love for is the most difficult person in the world, which is ourselves. So as Western people, we're encouraged, well, that's selfish. But if you don't have love for you, how can you share it with someone else?
Yeah.
And people would ask me about this, and it's like, if I want to invite you to my home for a meal, first of all, I have to get the food for me. Then when I have the food, I can share it with you. So this was really the background to all the years of my training with my teacher. And I would see it in action with him. Nothing fazed him. And he could be really strong and direct when he needed to be. Love is not weak, not ever. The cliche is love is the strongest force in the universe. Well, when you understand it, then yes, it becomes that. It becomes your strength, never your weakness. But because we don't understand it properly, we think, well, love means, well, I have to like everything that I actually don't like. No, I have to accept things that I don't agree with. You have to accept that these things exist. But then what is your relationship to them? Love is not weak at all, ever.
Yeah, beautiful. There's so many things in what you just said that yeah, I could pick up on. A lot of what you just said resonates. Particularly the part when you were speaking about the difficulty with your dad and owning responsibility for your part in it and looking for something that you could change on your side in order to affect the relationship as a whole. Yeah, I think that's a really important message. The message of never placing yourself in the victim space. And there are difficulties in my life now that I can, bring to mind where, where I'm doing that to some degree or another, putting myself in the victim role. And then the difficulty perpetuates. So that yeah, I had an argument with my dad recently as well, which is yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that. The real thing that comes up for me a lot is I have a 1-year-old son at home. So my wife and I have a 1-year-old son together, and the last 12 months have been really, really stressful and really, really challenging in terms of like sleep deprivation and learning all the new things you have to learn as a father and as parents together, and making the best life we can for him. And it puts a lot of extra stress on our relationship, my wife and I. And we are arguing more than I feel like we ever have with each other. And a lot of the time when we argue, I put myself in the victim role, like, it's unfair, you've done this to me, you need to change something about the way you're behaving so that I
It's
can
not
feel okay.
useful. I mean,
No, it's not useful.
it's
No.
not useful.
Yeah.
But also, your situation now, of course, it's a global situation for young families, sleep deprivation. Of course, everyone, I have grandchildren now, so everyone's been through that. But it's really, if you decide you're on a Dharma path, if as an individual you say, well, I'm on a Dharma path and I'm starting here in my direction rather than my goal, but my direction is to be free from fear and desire and not to be the victim, because the victim mentality comes from desire and fear. Why can't you understand me? Why can't you see my pain? Why can't, of course, your partner, your wife in this case, can say exactly the same thing. Why can't you
Yes.
see? And here's the
Yes.
thing you have to understand. In loving kindness, we have something called the Brahma Viharas, these 4 aspects of the pure mind. And one of them is compassion. Karuna is compassion. And compassion is the recognition, the intuitive recognition that everybody suffers because everybody has mind. Mind is the source of our suffering. Oh, well, of course it is. But the other thing we have to understand is, and this is what we don't understand very often, is that everybody's story, their own personal story, is as important to them as your story is to you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's what we miss.
Yes.
And so with the loving kindness, I had a similar situation. As I say, I'm a grandfather now, and I worked long hours in a factory. And I would come home from work, and the house would be a mess, and we had 2 young children, and I would feel abused. Why isn't my dinner ready? Why isn't this, I've worked from 7 in the morning till 7 at night in a factory. And then I went to my teacher and I said, it's like this. And he said, Michael, now you need loving kindness. So what do I need to do? And he gave me a specific practice. And he said, and this is what he said, you can send loving kindness to be in a place before you arrive there. And I thought, well, that's ludicrous. That's absolutely ridiculous. I never heard of something, but I trust this man.
Yeah.
And so I went back to the island and I went back to my work, and I did it. I did that. I sat in the car before I left work one evening at 7. I was tired, I was exhausted, going home, and I did what he told me to do, which I won't go into detail here. But the point is that when I arrived home, I arrived into a different environment where it
Wow.
wasn't where I saw a young woman my wife then was probably about 22 or something. You know, we were almost children. But I saw this young woman struggling with two babies at home all day, alone. And when I walked in, my natural response was, well, look, I didn't prepare any of this. I just did the practice that I was told would be useful. So rather than saying, well, why isn't everything ready for me? It was, well, why don't you just sit down and I'll make something to eat and I'll feed the youngest baby. Yes, and so on. So now I didn't do those things, but those things spontaneously changed when the I thought, got out of the way. That it's not about me. It's not about me. I can make you something to eat. Why can't I make you something to eat? It's not difficult. I can feed our youngest child. I can feed Michael and Adam, who they are, and I can feed him, and you can just rest. And that changes everything. And I don't know, you may be cynical to think, oh, that just means you're doing extra work. It doesn't feel like that. It feels like being of service. It feels like if we can help, we should help. And if we can't help, then leave something alone. Well,
Yes.
Mostly we can help. We can be of service. And when we have our people come to see me privately, the first, once we say hello to each other, the question from me is, so how can I be of service to you? What do you think I can say to you that will be useful in your life? And that's the point. And again, all of that, it's not about me. I don't think, in fact, I don't have a self-view, to go right back to the awakening and enlightenment questions, but just to share the thing that has benefited me so much in my life, that's brought me to a place of joy and beauty. But you also have to do the work.
Yes.
You know, it doesn't just happen.
Sure.
You know, I've met people who've spoken with my teacher, and I would say, you know, politely, so was it good for you, the good interview, when I was living in a monastery? And they would say something like, well, he said that I should do this, but I'm not going to do that. Well, why did you even go to see him?
Yeah.
You've wasted his time, you've wasted your time, and now you're wasting my time. As the teacher, you know, you need to say, well, I'm going to be open, at least, to everything you say to me, and to the practice that will come out of that. So, you know, Dhamma is the greatest blessing in my life, and accompanied by my teacher and my father. So these are the things that I put my hands together every day and say, you know, to the universe, more or less, thank you for presenting these things to me, where I didn't really have to make an effort to find them. They just kind of appeared in my life.
Yes, but you did, from my perspective, you did make an effort in the sense that you were open to your teacher, you were willing to commit to following through on his practices, and even when it was difficult for you, it sounds like even in the little story you told then, you'd worked 12 hours in a factory, even when it was difficult for you, you were still willing to follow through with the practice and see what the result was.
When I was about 15 or 16, no, a bit less, about maybe 14, I can't remember. My life as an adolescent was filled with fear. I was afraid, this may sound a bit ironic now, but I was afraid that the world would end in a nuclear holocaust. You know, that was the subject at the time. There were movies being made about it, nuclear war between Russia and America, and that idea terrified me. Of either being blown to pieces, or worse, I suppose, radiation sickness. So that was terrifying for me. And I had this idea, and there was a moment when that became really clear to me how that was affecting all my behavior, that I was not pleasant to be around, actually, because I was so afraid of everything.
Yeah.
So I was aggressive and angry and nastily sarcastic and so on. And the realization that came out of that was, I wanted to be free from this fear, or from all fear. Actually, I want to be free from the fear that I carried. And then kind of 3 or 4 years later, I found Transcendental Meditation, and that was the first step on the path. But the move was, I want not to carry this fear. I want fear not to be the dominant feature in my life. And so years later, when my teacher said, if you want to be happy, you have to cultivate a loving heart, that was exactly the opposite. the opposite to fear is love.
Right.
And so he said, I didn't understand it in that way at the time, but yeah, the fear is not useful for you. You know, we're not saying just step out into the road or drive your car with your eyes closed. We're not saying things that you have to take care of your life, but not to continually empower the fear. What you need to empower is love, which is acceptance, and then a kind response to what you're meeting. Because what you're meeting is not really what's happening. That's a perception you have of the situation. We don't see the world in the same way as anyone else. It's about our karmic dispositions and our, it's called bahula karma, our karmic habits. So we don't see the world as anyone else. The world we experience is the one that we create for ourselves, moment after moment after moment. And it's always about me, what I want, what I don't want, what I like, what I don't like, what I approve of, what I disapprove of, etc., etc. And that becomes a big obstacle because your view of life is very narrow. I want what I want, and I don't want what I don't want. And I refuse to be happy until I get what I want.
Yes.
Well, this is foolish. That if we focus on being happy, then what we need to do is to let go of the things that condition unhappiness in us. Not to try and create more happiness, but to let go of the conditions that lead us to experiences of unhappiness.
Yes, yes. And so in your life today, post awakening and post the dissolving of the sense of self for you, what is your day-to-day life like? What is your experience of life like today?
So when I was a monk, I lived as a monk for a short time with my teacher. And then one of my students here in France said to me, yes, but a monk's life is a different life. And I said, well, not when you're a monk, it's not. When you're a monk, that's your ordinary life. So you don't think of it as being different. This is what we do. We get up at 4 o'clock, we chant, we meditate, we have something to eat, and so on and so on. So my life now is not different from that. It's just my ordinary life. I take a walk. We live in a beautiful place. I walk, I write, I put things on Facebook. The only thing I put on Facebook, of course, is Dhamma talks. I don't put any photographs of my lunch or anything like that. And all the Dhamma talks are mine. You know, if you want Thich Nhat Hanh, he's readily available. And if you want stories from the suttas, you know, they're all readily available. So anything you read from me is my experience and my understanding of Dhamma. Yes,
but you also put, I've noticed you'll put verses from the
Dhammapada.
The Dhammapada usually at the bottom of your post. So you'll have a post about a teaching or a topic, and then there'll be a verse that will often relate to in some way what you're talking about.
Yeah. Yes, I do that. I do it. A lot of it. See, here we have a little shrine. None of these things are necessary.
Sure.
When I say we, our Dhamma hall is not here. This is my room. But this little shrine, I like it, and I have a little routine in the morning where I kneel and I chant. That's only for me. And most of that is a kind of nostalgia. It's a connection with my teacher. This is the man I admired in the Dhamma sense more than anyone else. And so, but none of these things are necessary. So I'm not sure what I'm doing today, but it will be something quite normal. There's nothing, and it's not. There's not a strong routine here. I like to cook, so I will cook something and probably walk a little bit later when it gets lighter, and so on and so on and so on. But there's nothing special in my life, really. The Zen master was asked, "What is it like to be awakened?" He said, "Well, in summer we sweat, in winter we freeze." So those things don't change. I still shower and shave and prepare food and eat it and sleep at night. It's a very ordinary. One of my students said to me, one of my close students said to me, my ambition is to be as boring as you. I think that is, you know, from the outside, that's how my life looks, I think. I don't do anything. You know, I travel a little bit, not so much now. Traveling has come down quite a lot as I'm older, but, you know, I travel, we do our retreats in Germany. And, it's kind of a quiet life, I think. I think it's
And do you have monks living with you on the property there?
No, here there are our house here in France is like a little, more like a vihara. So I live here with two students, two disciples, and they really take care of me, even when I think is not necessary. They do it anyway, so I'm very grateful for that. So for the three of us, it is a very quiet life.
Yeah, and then you have retreats that you hold in Germany. Do you have regular talks where people come to listen?
Here in France, you mean?
Yes.
No, no, we don't. The only thing, I suppose the only thing that we offer is this kind of meeting which is a private, not that we are, but a private interview, which is a one-to-one meeting.
Okay.
So it'll be similar to this, where you would ask a question, or if you don't even have a question, what happens now more and more is that people will come because they want the contact. That's really what they want. And they will come and say, would you speak about verse 206 in the Dhammapada? And so I have to find it. Okay, so what the Buddha is speaking about here is, and so on.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. So as you're speaking, I'm getting a sense of the path that you've walked and where you are now and the focus of your teaching. And I hear that, you know, fears and desires are something to be let go of, and the way that you can do that, or one way that you can do that, is through the practice of loving kindness. For me, I'm a yes.
Not only, it has to be this combination of awareness and love. It has to be vipassana and metta bhava. It has to be those two things, because they're like two hands that wash each other, resulting in the wisdom that follows it.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for that. I'm a counselor and a psychotherapist, and so part of my training is being aware of people's wounding and trauma. And I do find in my experience that, for me anyway, let's say, trauma that I hold in my body can get in the way of my meditation practice, or in the way of me, you know, being present and still in my body. And so working through that trauma, or healing it is very important to me on my path. And I'm curious around your understanding of wounding and trauma and how they might play a part in a seeker's journey.
Well, everything that we have met has brought us to this moment now, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, or acceptable or we feel unacceptable. And that's what we have to deal with. But anything we're carrying is just a story. I don't want to dismiss it as some, you know, it's like saying, well, just let go. This is a terrible piece of advice to give to anyone, because if people could let go, they would. Letting go happens when kind of you're not there. So we have to make this space for the difficulties that people meet. That's what the loving kindness is. It's the space where the difficulties that we meet can become fully known and not seen as dangerous or threatening, but just to be, okay, that happened. And now when I remember it, I relive it. But if I understand what I'm really reliving, we have the mind that's telling a story, but we have the body that is experiencing that again.
Yes.
And that's where we would need to put our attention to this. Everything we experience, ultimately, this is quite deep now. I'm not sure this is the right format for this, but whatever we experience is a sensation in the body. It's a sensation. And our difficulty is whether we like or don't like the sensation, whether it's pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral.
Mm.
And so if we can remind ourselves, okay, what I'm experiencing, if I just let go of the story of how this person hurt me, or that happened, or something else happened, if I can just put that to one side, it's not to dismiss it, it's just not to make it the focus.
Yes.
If I can just put my attention on the sensation, then that's what I'm experiencing. It's a sensation in the body. And the power of that sensation is something that I'm giving to it. Whatever we meet only has the power that we give it. So if we, and this is the, I don't know what to say, the highest practice, but when we come to Vipassana practice, as we understand more and more, then we see that the practice is sitting with what the mind presents and how that manifests in the body. And we just sit with that. And you can say, well, I don't like it. I want to avoid it. Okay, that's another situation to examine.
Yes.
We avoid the things we don't like, but
Yes.
they're still there. They're still under the surface, just waiting for that moment to appear again.
Yes.
So we have to, be kind and loving and gentle with ourselves. And this idea of being gentle is really important for me. That Vipassana is a very, very strong practice. It cuts deep like a samurai sword. It cuts really deep into who and what we think we are. But the environment for that investigation has to be love, a gentleness and a consistency of practice. That's not going to just create more and more difficulties for us. And that's why the teacher, based on my relationship with my teacher, has to be that almost like protective person to say, no, you don't need to push so hard. Just relax. Just sit.
Right.
You don't have to pursue something. You don't have to have this, got to beat this trauma. Just sit. It will present itself to you at the level you can accept. And then you can just begin to, in a way, chip away at it little by little by little, in this loving sense.
Yes. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, that makes sense.
But there's another part that I should say, that Vipassana practice is not therapy. That's not what we're speaking about at all. It's something very different. Well, I've never been to therapy, but it's something different from therapy. It's just that we don't confuse these two things.
Yes.
But I suppose the goal is the same, that we want to be free from the conditions that take us to unhappiness. It's the same goal.
Yeah, and counseling and psychotherapy, often, to use a term that people often use, they say it's talk therapy, and it can be, the term talk therapy can be seen as dismissive, but it is true in a sense that often when we're just talking about our difficulties, we can stay up on the mind level and not ever really drop down into the body and the felt sense of how we experience these difficult things. And we can throw stories around in the head, but never really dissolve or metabolize what's sitting down here. And so nothing ever really gets healed or worked through in a real sense. It kind of stays there. As you say, it stays there until that moment when it might arise into awareness again. And then we have a choice to avoid it or be with it. Yeah.
And that's more or less the structure of Vipassana. And as we presented on retreat, the first part is to be aware of the mind and its movements. And then as the awareness becomes stronger, you recognize, well, with every thought, mood, feeling, or emotion, there's a corresponding and simultaneous sensation in the body. So that becomes object. And then towards the very end, there's this, if it happens, this idea of complete letting go. So you're just the beingness of the moment. But again, we can't make that happen. We can only just do the process, little by, let's say, little by little. But I think people want to. I was making a retreat in India. I taught in India for a long time, and there was a nun who would come and sit with us, a Buddhist nun. And one time she said to me, "What do you do to people in your room?" I said, well, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, when they come in, their heads hanging low, and they have no energy, and they're almost crying. So what do you do?" And I thought, well, I just love them. And then she said, because when they come out, they're almost skipping and whistling and can't wait to get to the meditation. So
Yeah.
I just love them. And I think that's all people really need in an intimate situation, is someone to listen to them and to acknowledge, yes, what you're experiencing is painful. It's not to dismiss it. Don't just let go. That's a dreadful, dreadful thing to say to anyone. But yes, okay, I accept. Now, what can we do about it? You know, I think it's to change something. Even though, of course, technically we are completely alone, superficially, if we feel we're supported by someone, it can be very useful.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful. All right, Michael. Well, I'm running out of questions. I did prepare some questions that I wanted to ask you, but really, I've just been, while I've been sitting with you, I've just been sort of following my curiosity and my interest. And a lot of the questions that I had written down, we've kind of covered that ground anyway. And yeah, I'm just appreciating, yeah, your ability to follow my interest and converse in a way that is really rich and alive for me. So yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, just want to thank you for your time today. I really, really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. And yeah, thank you so much.
Though it may sound grand, but based on the instruction of my teacher, my only function is to share Dhamma. Personal views, not opinions, and not so much about me. I don't think that's so interesting, but to share Dhamma. And so others can receive, hopefully, the benefits that I have received in all these years. So it was very pleasant. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Michael.